Hello and welcome to the Tactical Business Podcast. I am your host, Wade Skalsky, and today we are talking with my friend and firearms instructor, Chris Nicklin. Chris, how are you doing, man?
Doing really good, Wade. How are you?
Good. So thank you for sitting down with me today. Let's start a little bit with the beginning, right? I know that you went into the armed forces. Why did you do that? What was the story behind that?
It's kind of a strange story. A lot of folks, they have all kinds of different reasons for being, for enlisting or different things like that. For me, it boiled down to looking at where I was in life, looking at some of the characters I was hanging around with, looking at where I saw my life going, and deciding that the shooting war that was going on at the time was a better option than where I was headed. So,
Right.
So there I was, and my family has a history of being U.S. Marines. I've got all kinds of different generations of U.S. Marines in my family. So the choice was obvious.
So you enroll in the Marine Corps. Talk to me a little bit about how your path to becoming, because I know you were an instructor, a firearms instructor in the Marine Corps as well, yes?
Well, serving in a leadership role as a non-commissioned officer, I was a NCO squad leader for a couple of different platoons. And part of the job is training your troops, the guys that are assigned to you. So in that capacity, yeah, I took on an instructional role in a couple of different units when new guys would check in and stuff like that, and we would have different training evolutions for whatever the topic was, whether it was land navigation or mount urban tactics or firearms. A lot of times it would be assigned to an NCO to train up the new guys, and so I started doing that then quite a bit.
And is that when you started to like teaching? Or did you not? Did you like it then? Not like it then? Did that give you the bug?
I think back then it was more about the folks that you're training, because in that circumstance, you're dependent on these guys. And so when you're dependent on somebody to potentially save your life, you sort of want them to be pretty well trained. So the incentive is not just for them, but it's a little selfish too, right? If I have to march onto a battlefield, I want the guy on my left and right to be the most well-trained guys covering me as they can be. And the way to ensure that is to do it yourself.
Right, yeah. So you go through the Marines, you get out of the Marines. What do you do once you're out of the Marines?
Kind of wandered aimlessly for just a little while, to be honest with you. I ended up, I tried out college, wasn't for me. I ended up working at a couple of different martial arts schools. I ran some pretty large martial arts programs here on the East Coast. I was teaching Muay Thai, Filipino martial arts, Jeet Kune Do, Jian-Fan Kung Fu. I was doing some MMA stuff in the early days of MMA. Back then we called it Vale Tudo. It wasn't even MMA. UFC was on like UFC 2.
Right.
Back then. So I'm a little bit of an old guy now.
Well, I think I'm older than you, so it says you're not old. You're just experienced.
Right.
So okay, so you're running the martial arts schools. You're going through a lot of different permutations of that, mm-hmm. and then from there you decided to become a police officer. What was your thinking on that?
It was a career that I could do that offered stability, reasonable pay. I was already trained in a lot of the hard skill sets that you needed to have to do that job effectively. I was good at talking to people, just from dealing with people coming and going from the martial arts school. Didn't scare me to have to punch a guy in the face if he needed it, for whatever that's worth.
Just not me today.
Yeah.
If you can't tell, we're doing this interview in person, so we're in studio, if you will, at the gun range, and so it's don't punch me in the face if I offend you.
Of course not. So anyway, it's I had a young family at the time, and it seemed like a decent way to be able to look after the family without re-enlisting and going back overseas. Because remember, September 11th of 2001 was early on in my police career, and so it let me have a way to, still kind of do something for the community, do what I was good at, and be home for the kids at night.
And did you spend your entire career at the same police department?
I did.
Okay, cool. And so you're at the police department. How long were you a police officer for?
I was a police officer for about 17 years.
And then, and I know that when you were as a police officer, then you moved into SWAT, right?
Right.
Walk me through that. What is that process like? How does someone get in on the SWAT team? What is that like? What is the training that you guys do?
So we're fortunate. We have a full-time SWAT team here. And so their entire job is to be the SWAT team. They have ancillary duties that they have to take care of here and there, but their primary job is to train and be ready to respond to those emergencies that your typical uniformed patrol officer is not equipped or trained to deal with. So we were real lucky in that fashion. Now, the tryout process it changes over time. It's morphed a few times depending on what's going on and the needs of the department and the SWAT team. But there's a physical tryout. You have to do your fitness testing. You can't be too much of a fat guy and be on a SWAT team. It doesn't really work real well that way. There's an interview process, and then there's SWAT school, where you go through the basic tactical training of a SWAT officer, and that entire period is you're under evaluation. And you're assigned a senior SWAT officer as your evaluator, and they rotate that responsibility daily. So every day a different guy or gal is watching you while you're going through your training, and they're checking the boxes. Does he meet the standard? Does he not meet the standard? Does he exceed the standard, or whatever? And then at the end of that SWAT school, they sit down and they determine, all right, well, who's our number one candidate coming out of this process of this group of people? And you get ranked in a draft order. And after that, if there is an opening, if you come out ranked number one on the list, not for nothing, but I did. And
Right.
little shameless pat on my own back,
dude,
right?
We're all competitors here. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
So, but if you come out number one on the list and there's an opening, you're the first up, and you get slid over to the team, and then the next guy on the next opening, and so forth. So it's different for every department, though. Everybody has their own process and how they do that. That was ours at the time. Likely that the process now on that same team is probably different.
Right.
That's okay.
How many people were on the SWAT team at that time?
At that time, there were 18 of us, including 2 sergeant supervisors.
So then is it like almost like a fireman, where you're either training or you're responding to a call, basically, right? Is that, or are you on duty then as a regular police officer?
So you have a regular working shift,
Right.
right? And during that time, you're doing some of those ancillary duties I was talking about. You're maintaining SWAT equipment. I was in charge of the armory at Special Operations. So everybody from the Marine Patrol to the motor cops to the bike unit, I was in charge of all the weaponry we had in the armory. So that took up a lot of my time, maintaining all that equipment as an ancillary duty. And then we have training days. Our team had 2 training days every week, which is a lot for a municipal SWAT team, which is pretty good. And then we have call out. So, back then it was pagers. So if the pager went off, again, aging myself a little bit on that one.
Right.
Pager went off at 2 a.m. Hey, grab your stuff and show up. We're going to use this location as a sort of a makeshift command post, and then we're going to move on the objective after that.
So in the Hampton Roads area where we are, there's a ton of military here.
Sure.
Right? Do you feel that the SWAT team was influenced by all of that, like human capital, right? Because we have so much talent here with regards to operators and military.
I can say without doubt that we have leaned on that community on several occasions, whether it was for gunsmithing services, because there was a couple of guys in the local area that were really talented at gunsmithing that helped us out with some equipment issues. Whether it was tactics training, some of the local folks have come to our training days and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing it this way?" Or, "Hey, this is how we do it," or stuff like that. So yeah, that's absolutely something that we have, and as far as I know, continue to do with our local partners, because the way they look at it is, why would we not help the local guys? Our families live here. They're the ones that are going to show up for our families if we're somewhere else.
Right. Well, yeah, like when you're dropping your kid off at school, right? That's your SWAT team was going to be the one that was going to respond.
Right. Or even if it was just anything in general,
Right.
this guy is overseas doing terrible things to terrible people on our behalf. His wife and kids are here. He wants to know that whoever shows up to help them when they call is a competent human.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like, and then I feel like there's an ethos. Like I talk about this a lot with regards to the gun range, right? Which is you'll never meet, if you have a good range, you'll never meet a more friendly group of helpful people that all they want you to do is first be safe, help you to be safe, and second of all, just to get better at what you're trying to do. That's been my experiences. I've never been in the military. Although I used to hunt, grew up in North Dakota, used to hunt when I was younger. I came to firearms late in terms of for personal protection, and I was always astounded by how friendly everyone was at the range.
That's a good general description of the firearms community in this country as a whole. If you go take a precision rifle match, right? Some of the equipment these guys use to go to these matches is really expensive, right? These guys are running $15,000 rifles. The scope alone on the top of one of those things is between $3,000 and $6,000. There's all kinds of equipment involved. But if you show up as a new guy, everyone out there is going to say, hey, if you don't have this, you want to try mine. Or if you ask another shooter on your squad, hey, can I borrow your rangefinder? Or do you mind if I use your rear bag or your tripod? Every single one of them is going to say, absolutely. None of them are going to say, well, no, I don't want to give that guy an advantage to do better and compete against me. That is secondary to any of that. I mean, yeah, those guys want to win, right? But their primary concern is, I guess for lack of a better word, good fellowship on a range.
Right.
I think that's absolutely true in the shooting community.
Well, and you want to have it a place that you want to go, right?
Yeah.
Because
they want to grow their sport.
Yeah. Well, and I think also too is that there's a scenario where I've noticed a lot of talking to people in the community of there's a lot of humility, right? So it's I don't know everything. I may know a lot, but I don't know everything. I learn something every time I go to the range, right? Even if it reinforces a lesson I already know. And I find that humility is what makes people, they approach it as a craftsman versus some other way.
In the martial arts world, we used to say, show up on the mat with a white belt attitude. Didn't matter if you were, a 7th degree black belt or some, crazy ninja certified something or other. You show up with that white belt attitude, there's always something to learn. It doesn't matter who you are. I think even top shooters in the competitive realm will tell you that.
So and I think a lot of that has to do with that's a mindset. It's a mindset that everybody has, right? So, so you're at SWAT, you have this community mindset. You're bringing other people in. You're learning a lot. When you left the police department and left SWAT, did you go directly into firearms instruction, or what did you do from there?
I had been in firearms instruction for the police department. Prior to going to SWAT, I was a firearms instructor for the police department, and that was my full-time job for 6 years. As a police officer, is training the other officers, get them qualified and trained up so that they can work the street not only in a safe manner for them, but for the people they're supposed to be serving out there. So yeah, I had been in the instructional space for a long time as far as firearms. Now I just get to do it as a paycheck, which is nice.
Right. Well, a firearms instructor in the private sector, right? So yeah. And how is it different in terms of? Let's start there. Like, how is it different being a firearms instructor? Because you run the program here at Freedom Outdoors.
Right.
Yeah. So you have to think of it both on a macro level in terms of, okay, what are we doing for the program? What classes are we going to offer?
Sure.
Who's going to staff those? But then on a micro level, like a personal level, like you're my firearms instructor. You've always been my firearms instructor. And so that's a different concern too, right? So what's different about the private sector for you than when you were teaching on SWAT, or is it this exactly the same?
I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, but it's not very different, because when you're dealing with these use of force issues or with firearms training, especially on a police department, right? You get folks on a police department that are coming from everywhere. Just like an open enrollment class on the civilian side. They could be showing up for their first day at the police academy fresh out of college. They might have done a couple of tours in the military. They may have been a construction person or something like that and decided that they wanted to be a police officer and change careers. Any of those is possible on an open enrollment class too. So you don't really change a whole lot. It's people are people. You deal with them the way you deal with people. That is, if you have your head screwed on right. I mean, I'm not out here trying to be a drill instructor, screaming and yelling at people on the range. I think that's a misconception that people have when they assume an instructional role, especially in military and law enforcement circles. I think they believe that they have to put on their Smokey Bear and their black belt and get out here and start, crushing recruits. That's not really how it works. That's not conducive to good training. So we don't do that here. I wouldn't have encouraged it on the police department. And I don't think I did things that way in the military either, because I need people to learn. And when they're stressed out and getting screamed at, they're not learning. Now, if I was training a bunch of contract guys to certify to go overseas, they're supposed to be showing up already trained for the most part. So I'm just vetting their training, making sure they're still in shape, making sure they can still hit the target and move on. But, you know, if I gotta yell at folks, I'll just ask them to leave the range. Whether it's a safety violation or an attitude problem, I'm not in the business of yelling at people.
Yeah, well, you know, you're in a classroom. The range is a classroom.
It
right?
is.
Like we're sitting in a classroom right now. There's, you know, and it's a classical. There's chairs and, you know, there's tables and there's a
Whiteboard,
whiteboard, yeah, and a, you know, TV for videos. And so people, they think to themselves, oh, okay, I'm in a classroom. I know what to do. I sit down. I'm going to learn about whatever, right? But the range is a classroom. Even if there's not someone there giving you instruction, I mean, you're getting reps shooting. And I think that if you approach firearms with the heart of a teacher, you'll never go wrong.
Yeah, but the whole world is a classroom, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
You know, it doesn't matter to me what you're trying to learn, whether it's computer programming or, you know, shooting your handgun. If you have the opportunity to learn something, the geography of where you're standing, kind of irrelevant. You know, and that's something I've tried to tell my kids for many years. Don't let the lack of a classroom stop you from learning what you want to learn.
Well, yeah, and for sure, and I think you can. There's so much available to people right now in terms of on YouTube, right? Like you can literally, if you want to look at 3 different ways to clean. And I'm not saying everything on YouTube is good. I'm not talking about you're grimacing, but I'm talking about like if you find a reputable source. So like for example, if you're like, hey, I want to make sure that I'm cleaning my gun correctly, right? So you can look up your specific gun, you know, I'm a Glock guy, so I can look up Glock 17 Gen 5, Glock 19 Gen 5. Like, how do I clean this properly, right? And you don't, you know, you can be a student always. You don't have to always be on the range to get that figured out.
Absolutely, you know, and nothing beats in-person instruction. That's just the way that it is. You know, the opportunity to have the give and take with the instructor or other students in the class and learn from them. You really can't go wrong doing that. Now, can you learn things from those other sources, these more modern, you know, learning sources? Absolutely. But you got to be careful on vetting the source sometimes. That's the tricky part. You know, you could look up, you know, how to shoot a gun on the internet and you'll come up with days worth of information on just lining up the sights and pressing the trigger. And you'll hear a million different philosophies on how to get that done. And some of them are going to be downright wacky.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and absolutely, yeah, I'm not saying, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's one reason why that I pay for training, right? Like that I come and have you teach me what to do, because every time that I'm with you, my family gets safer.
See, and I thought it was my wit and charm.
Yeah, no, I don't like you. I don't like you at all. No, but it's every time that I do a class, my family is safer, right? Because I become more proficient in the firearm. And I know, you know, basically from your experience and your certifications, I mean, how many armorer certifications do you have?
A handful.
Like 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like Glock and
Remington,
so,
Bushmaster AR.
Yeah. So when I need something on my AR or my Glock, I just come to you and have you do it. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about. You leave SWAT, you come to private instruction, you're running the program here. Let's talk about mindset, right? Because I think that's one thing that you and I talk about a lot is because again, I've never been in the military, I've never been in a gunfight. You know, I did do martial arts and was a martial arts instructor like you for a long time, but it's a different, you know, firearms is a different animal, right? In some ways. And so what is the mind? Let's talk a little bit about mindset and your thoughts on that, because I know we talk about that a lot.
Well, you know, from an instructional perspective, it's funny that you point out the differences between martial arts and firearms. I am constantly astounded by the similarities, you know, and depending on what system you're training in within the martial arts world, firearms is incorporated in that system. You know, if we were to break it down the way they do in the Filipino martial arts systems, they have projectile weapons as one of the categories of that system. And so this constitutes that projectile weapon as far as they're concerned. So they definitely address it in some of the non-traditional ways as far as that goes. But when you break it down, martial arts is a military art or a military expression of use of force. Firearms is absolutely by definition a martial art. And it just seems to be looked at a little bit differently. And the problem you sometimes run into is when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. And you can't emphasize enough a lot of times that, hey, this is the last tool you're supposed to use,
right?
Not the first tool you're supposed to use. So having those other skill sets like you do is actually a lot more of a benefit than you may think, because something like situational awareness that you learn from just being aware of your environment. And I'm sure martial arts instructors preach that to their students every day. I know I did, because the best defense for the punch, Daniel-san, is no be there, right? So if you're aware of the environment and the surroundings and you see these problems beginning to percolate, leave.
Yeah.
Leave. There's no room for the machismo in there. Just go. Especially if you have your family with you and you've got your wife and your kids or grandma or Aunt Sally, it doesn't matter to me. But if you're responsible for other people's safety, discretion is the better part of valor in that one.
Yeah, well, I think I look at it as different than martial arts because that it's the, like you said, it's that it's the deadly force aspect of it, right?
Right.
So you can, in martial arts, you can spar and you can practice everything and you can roll on a mat, you can do all that, and you can say to someone, hey, listen, I'm gonna teach you right now how to break someone's neck, or here this is what you're gonna do to their kidneys or whatever. But there's never an instance where you actually do that, right? Whereas I think, what I'm saying in training. Right?
Well, I'll tell you this story. I had been teaching for a while at a pretty large school here, and it was known for having an enormous adult training program for self-defense. And during one of the training sessions, we were doing some of that sparring that you're talking about. And this sparring, it was light timing sparring. And one of the students in the class had complained to me that somebody else was getting a little heavy-handed. So I said, all right, well, let me rotate in and see what's going on. Maybe it's your pain tolerance. Maybe it's their aggressiveness. Let me evaluate. So I jumped in and I started mixing it up, and I rotated in with this other person. And that person came after me pretty heavy. And so out of whatever instinct or just seeing the opening and go for it, I kicked this guy in the neck. And he fell straight down.
Mm.
Now, previous to that, the last time I saw somebody fall that way was somebody I watched get shot in the chest on a battlefield and fell straight down, lights out, like the puppet had the lines cut. And that was one of the scariest moments in my civilian life because I thought I killed that guy.
Yeah.
Didn't, but I did, unfortunately, cause a pretty extensive injury on that one. And it wasn't even intentional.
Well, yeah.
That was just one of those, his hands are down, my shin comes up, contact right there, and boom. And that person ended up having to change careers because of that injury.
Mm.
So it can happen.
Yeah.
It can happen. And I was just grateful. In the next room doing a jiu-jitsu class was an emergency room doctor. So I ran over and grabbed Tim real quick and was like, hey, you need to check this guy out. Right. And he calmed me down a little bit and let me know, hey, this guy's got a concussion for sure. We need to get him looked at, but he'll live.
Well, and I think that's the there's a scene. Ever seen the movie The Rock?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie. There's a scene where Sean Connery but Nicolas Cage hands Sean Connery like the nerve gas, right?
Right.
It's like the moment that you stop respecting this, it kills you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think about that a lot with regards to firearms training.
That is absolutely true.
And martial arts training too. You know, and
I think I tell people all the time, if you operate a chainsaw like an idiot, odds are good you're going to get hurt. You operate a handgun like an idiot, odds are good you're going to get hurt. So you're absolutely right.
So we've talked about that mindset before too, where it's a lot of people will come to firearms with a hardened mindset because of something that happened to them negatively.
Right.
And I'm talking about civilians here, right? So I mean, obviously, if you're in the military and you're trained, they're going to put you in situations where you may need to use it. And especially in the last 20 years, we've got a lot of people who've been in that situation.
Lots.
So that is a whole nother can of worms about that mindset and how to deal with that. But like for a civilian like me, and even though I've had the martial arts training, is like, what do you counsel people on in terms of their mindset that haven't had that negative experience, right?
Right. So it sort of goes back to what I said earlier about situational awareness first. If I pay attention to my surroundings, I get my face out of the screen, put down the phone, and look at what's happening around me, then I'm unlikely to be surprised. And I've made this joke to you a couple of times that I'm not very fast with a gun, but I don't miss a lot, right? I know I'm not fast. There are guys that shoot with me on a regular basis that are way faster than I am. There's a guy that shoots with me on a regular basis out of the holster onto the A zone of an IPSC target at 7 yards in 0.84 seconds. I've seen it with my own eyes. That's fast.
Super fast.
I am never going to be that fast. But I don't worry about being that fast because I pay attention to what's going on around me. And if I see the problem brewing 2 blocks away, I simply turn left, turn right, make a U-turn, and get out of there. So for me, situational awareness is first. I joke with one of another instructor that I know. He says, you're going to know that I'm shooting at you when you hear the bullets impacting around you, right? Which, I mean, he's saying it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but he brings that military experience. And that was the kind of thing he's used to doing in I don't even know how many battles. But we're in the continental United States. You can't do that.
Right. Suppressive fire is not okay. It's not the goal.
So that's the double edge of the sword with the military experience that you talked about a minute ago. These guys are coming back and they have a ton of experience being in that stressful environment. But the rules were different. Yeah, for those guys. So if they default to that military training, that can cause problems for them, even though that's exactly what they were trained to do. On the civilian side, not being familiar with violence, real violence, that can cause panic and freeze up. And that's a problem as well. I think in the civilian world in the continental United States, we have to find that middle ground or kind of zigzag back and forth. Bruce Lee said, you want to absorb what is useful, you reject what is useless, and you add what is uniquely your own to your system. I think that applies. So again, firearms and martial arts, same thing.
Well, and I think the other thing for martial arts is that I'd always tell my students is that you're going to downshift to your basic habits, whatever they are. Right. So one reason why you want to get super good at the very basics, like just forget about the fancy looking moves from the movies, right? Like jumping in the first of all, never.
It's all nonsense.
It's all nonsense. Never jump in the air. Never jump in the air. My entire martial arts philosophy is I'm going to kick you in the knee and then I'm going to run away. Like that's my whole.
That's sound thinking.
That's my whole goal. It's like I'm going to kick you really hard in the knee and then I'm going to run as fast as I can. Right.
That is sound thinking.
Now I got a wife and 2 kids, so that's probably not an option. But back in the day, that was my whole strategy: kick you in the knee, run away. And I think and so with firearms, it's like you're going to downgrade to whatever habit you have that you've done the most times,
right?
And that's where the reps at the range come in.
Right.
So it's not enough to just buy a gun and know how to point and shoot, pull the trigger.
Yeah. The platitudes come to play, right? We don't arise to the occasion of combat. We default to our lowest level of training. Hopefully, that lowest level at some point is better than whatever you're facing.
Yeah. Well, I think with regards to like take everyday carry, for example, mm-hmm. right? There's the whole different set of skills that you need if you're gonna carry every day mm-hmm. versus if you just have it in your house next to your bedside in a safe.
Right. Just because you own a gun, that doesn't make you armed.
So you're right, exactly. Well, yeah, you say that to me every single time I'm on the range with you. Well, let's talk. So let's keep going on the mindset for a little bit. So what is there like a general philosophy that you could have for civilians that are saying, okay, I've got a gun, I want to buy a gun. What is the mindset that I need to adopt that will hold me in good stead going forward?
Well, I think that we addressed it, that student mindset of learning, right? That's always going to help, because the more you know, the better off you're going to be. You don't want to get so cluttered with choices that you end up freezing, right? That's another problem. Well, do I do this technique or that technique or this technique? While you're busy making up your mind, bad things are still happening. So you don't want to get there either. But at the same time, you've got to practice. You've got to work on the fundamentals, and that's true of anything, right? Whether I'm shooting a rifle at a distant target, the fundamentals are what's more critical than the fancy equipment. If I'm shooting my handgun at close range at several targets, the fundamentals again, that's going to be the key there. It doesn't matter what the technique is, but you got to have those fundamentals buried into your subconscious hard. They need to be there so that you're doing that without thought. That unconscious competence in that skill set is what you're trying to achieve. That frees your brain up to worry about other tactical evaluations in the circumstance, right? So I don't have to think, finger straight, I'm not pointing at a target. Now I have to look at that corner. Now I have to look in that corner. Now I have to look in that corner. My finger's already straight, so I'm scanning my environment right away, right? Where's the best egress? Where's a possible ingress for the bad guy? These fundamental gun handling skills need to be ingrained. Then you can start worrying about these crazy tactics that people always want to talk about, the sexy side of training that everybody wants to learn. I want to learn how to, do room clearing. Why?
Yeah, when are you ever going to do that?
Why?
Right, yeah.
Well, if somebody breaks into my house, I need to... Look, dude, you're in your home.
Yeah.
There's a bad guy somewhere, or possibly several bad guys somewhere. You're in your room. Your wife is on that side of the room. Your dog is on this side of the room. You're in the one place where the bad guy isn't. Why in the hell are you going to leave?
Yeah, well, and like when you came to my house, like I had you come to my house that we could do, we could kind of break down the setup that I have there and what to do and all that. And it was a very eye-opening to me, because I was like, all right, well, what am I going to do? Because, and you're like, well, you're going to get your family out of the house if you can, get out of there, right? And like, what's your escape plan? I was like, escape plan? And I think that leads into a really good topic, which is two things. One is that it's not just range time.
No.
The majority of the time practicing is dry firing at your house, right? Like you're in the garage.
Absolutely.
It's like, okay, if your everyday carry, how am I going to practice how I'm going to pull my shirt, right?
Right.
How am I going to practice the draw, right? And so,
how are you going to reholster?
Yeah, exactly. Because you're going to spend, you have 10 times the amount of time at your house than you do driving to the range and I'm going to shoot, right? So
people like to say they don't.
Right, but
people like to say they don't.
Well, yeah.
I don't have time for that. Man, make time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes a day. It's there are tons of university studies, white paper studies that talk about physical skill sets, and they've studied this with athletes. The frequency of training is more productive than the duration of training. So you're better off training 3 days a week for 15 minutes than you are once a month for 3 hours, because you're getting that constant development of those neural pathways for those skill sets. This muscle memory, people like to call it. It's not really what's happening. You're just strengthening the connections between the nerves to conduct that physical skill set. The nerves firing in order, the myelination or whatever's happening there. The more times you do that repetition, you're building that pathway, making it easier for the electrical signal to travel back and forth between your brain and the muscle. And so doing that every day for a few minutes is better than, doing it real hard and then not doing it again for a long time.
Well, yes, I'd like to say is volume reps are the way, right? And that's in anything. So like my writing, right? So it's just writing reps. I have to write every day, right? I have to, if I want to get really good at everyday carry, then I have to do something every day or
right.
At least 3 to 5 times a week,
yeah.
Practicing very
Sure.
basic maneuver.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But, your live fire training ought to be little more than a verification of your dry fire training routine. You practice the same things. And then when you take it to the range and shoot actual bullets, you should be hitting the target if you're doing your dry fire right. If you're not, something's going wrong with your dry fire.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely. I would agree that dry fire practice is important, whatever the planning phase of your deal is, if you're talking about, well, I'm worried about somebody breaking into the house, and in your case, how similar was what we looked at for your specific example to a fire escape plan?
I mean, it's almost identical, basically.
It is, because we plan for that, because how are you going to fight a fire on your own? If your garage is absolutely consumed by flames, how are you fighting that on your own?
Yeah, you're not. Well, and also too is people,
so when you have 6 intruders in your house,
yeah,
how are you fighting that on your own?
Yeah.
Good luck.
Well, yeah, and
life is not a John Wick movie.
Well, yeah, and exactly. And the other thing too is when you have other people involved, young kids, your wife, you want one plan, right? We're doing one thing. I don't care if it's a fire. I don't care if it's the house is flooding. I don't care if there's intruders. We are doing one. The plan is the same. Like when there's an emergency, this is our emergency escape plan, right?
And if it's a good plan, it should work in multiple scenarios,
right?
So you're covered there. But too many people, they want to stand on that righteous indignation. Somebody's in my house. My home is my castle. We get righteously indignant over the idea of somebody invading our homes and our privacy. And I get it. And I understand why the mindset gets like that. But again, you have no idea what you're walking into when you open that door. When you're the point guy on the breach, that door flies open and you walk in that room and you have no idea what you're going to meet. That's a bit of a wake up, So people that have been there, they think about it. Yeah, I would rather lay a trap for the bad guy than go running into his ambush,
Well, and I think that comes to the humility part of it, right? Where it's like in martial arts, it's no one wins a fight, right? And so even if you win, you don't win. So that means that you either were unable to de-escalate the fight, or you were unable to have your situational awareness to where you avoided it. Yeah. And so very rarely, I mean, I'm sure maybe it happens in 1 in 1,000 times in the civilian life, are people legitimately ambushed where they could not have had any clue to see it coming at all, right? I mean, in my opinion, I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion.
Well, I watched some CCTV video. I think it was yesterday. It was a gun store. Two people working in the gun store. They're behind the counter. Their backs are turned to the front door of the business. They turn around, and for whatever reason, this criminal decides he wanted to rob a gun store.
It happens more than once. This happened in Tucson. There were these. This happened when I was in high school in Tucson. These 2 kids decided they wanted to rob a gun store. I was like, it'd be like trying to rob where we are right now. I can't even tell you how many armed people are here right now, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like it's a bad call.
Right. So, but and in that situation, those guys weren't looking for that problem to arise. Now, were they armed at the moment that it happened? Yeah, so that really helped out.
Yeah, exactly.
But as you see the smoke rising from the muzzles in the video, one of the bad guys falls over, bam, done. I mean, clearly he's done. The other one kind of runs off camera, and you see one of the, I guess, employees or proprietors, shifting his position to gain a better view of the guy that ran off, just in case, I guess, the guy's going to come back or whatever. Now, why he would do that in that circumstance, I don't know. But at least he's thinking, hey, I can watch this guy on the floor over here, and I can watch the bad guy fleeing at the same time. So that was a pretty good move on his part, so that he could see what was going on.
Yeah.
But in that instance, they had no idea that was coming.
But that's so rare. I mean, I guess the humility part, and you're talking about the ideas is like, look, the only thing I care about at the end of the day, burn my house down, destroy all my goods.
I got insurance, man.
Yeah. Are my wife and my 2 children okay? That's it, right? Even, and I'm going to enrage a lot of people, but the dog makes it or doesn't make it, I don't care, right? Like,
oh, see, that's where you and I got to part ways. You and I got to part ways on that one. That Labrador is absolutely my partner.
You're going back in the burning house for the dog.
That's it.
I got to get the dog.
I made the joke about the John Wick movies. I had never seen them, and then I watched that first one, and I was like, now I get it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that.
I grew up on a farm, and so I had a much different relationship with animals, I think, because of that. I should say a vanity farm and a farming community. So it's like, your animals are your food.
Right.
Like my dog, I joke with my wife, like my dogs are emergency food supply.
Yeah,
So.
my wife makes that same joke.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh.
Where is she from originally?
She is from the country.
See, that's what it is. It's like that's how we are. The country. You can take the girl out of the country, my man, but you can't take the country out of the girl.
Side note on that one. My wife grew up in a household where not only did they raise their own food on the farm, but they would label it in the freezer. So when you pulled out that package of pork chops,
it had the name on it.
It had the pig's name on it.
That's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I would do that. I'm excited because I ordered I have a cow show coming to my house here in a few weeks, and so I'm excited about it because that's what my dad used to do. Is
right.
On the farm is you have a big freezer in the garage, and
you
would go to the go pick up the cow, take it to the butcher, and then you'd have meat for a year for the family.
Yeah, so that's what deer season is for me. I'm getting ready to head out. I think archery season starts October 7th, so hopefully I'll get a couple of days, and then muzzleloaders because I love shooting black powder in the woods in the fall, and then hopefully by gun season I'll have a couple of tags punched, but if not, me and that 308 are going to go.
Makes it much more likely.
Make some meat. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So we're almost out of time, so I just want to talk about one more thing, and that's we talked about a student having a student mindset when you approach firearms, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the best things about firearms is that it is an endless rabbit hole. Like you can go so deep on any part of it that you want, right? And I think that a lot of people don't realize, just what an adventure it can be, right?
Sure.
So if someone has anxiety about starting that adventure, right? Meaning they say to themselves, man, it's like the world's getting crazy. I was not brought up around guns. Up until this point, I may have even been anti-gun. What is something that you would say to that person about what they should do to start on that path?
I literally deal with every one of those statements every day. People come in for our training classes, our introductory handgun class, and a lot of them, hey, I grew up in New England or some other gun unfriendly place, Chicago, Los Angeles, something like that, and they have no idea, but they see the news, and a couple of years ago there's riots everywhere, and they're scared, and the world's going to hell. Number one, turn off the television. Stop scaring the hell out of yourself every day with that craziness. But we deal with that all the time, and the first step is seek competent instruction. Somebody that can literally, if need be, hold your hand through the process. That way you're on the range with somebody who knows what they're doing. And even if you have no idea what's going on, that their entire job is to make sure that you start learning this the right way and safely without harming yourself or anybody else. So seek competent instruction. We see those folks all the time. I myself didn't grow up in a place where firearms were part of the culture. I grew up north, and that wasn't a thing. First time I fired, other than with my dad one time at the range when I was a kid, first time I fired firearms, parasite. When I really got an introduction to what these things are about. So we see that a lot. So seek competent instruction, not just reading video or watching videos or reading articles or any of that stuff, but actually show up on the range with an instructor so that you can get your hands on these materials. When you learned how to drive a car, if you had any sense at all, when you sat down in the driver's seat, you kind of got that feeling of responsibility and, wow, if I do this wrong, I can really make a mess. I better be careful. Same thing's going to happen when we put a gun in your hand the first time. You're standing there and you're looking at it and you're thinking to yourself, wow, if I mess this up, things can go real bad real fast. So take your time with it. Trust yourself. Find a good instructor. Trust them. Vet the person you're getting the information from. Be careful about taking advice from some random person. Just because he's been shooting guns since he's knee-high to a grasshopper, that doesn't mean he's been doing it right. Maybe he's been doing it wrong for the last 40 years. Find a competent person to do that. The staff here, we have a ton of military vets, right? I have a whole bunch of U.S. Marines. I have a couple of Navy SEALs. I've got guys that were professional security contractors for big companies, SWAT cops, canine cops, undercover narcotics detectives. That's the training staff here. If you show up here to train, you've got a competent firearms professional that's going to hold your hand through the process. Hopefully you've got something like that where you are if you're listening.
Yeah, if you're in the Hampton Roads area, you can't go wrong with Freedom Outdoors for sure. Well, Chris, listen, man, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today. I know your time is valuable. It's valuable to me because, like I say, every time we have a lesson, I thank you because you make my family safer. So it was a great talk today. I can't wait to have you on the show.
Well, that's my pleasure.
Thank you, man. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.